My son invited me to Christmas dinner last week. That might sound normal, except Nathan told his wife and her entire family that I died in a construction accident 15 years ago. The invitation came addressed to Mr. George Sullivan, Emerald Holdings LLC. He had no idea he was inviting his own father. I stared at that cream-colored cardstock with the Whitmore family crest, running my thumb over the embossed gold lettering. Please join us for Christmas Eve dinner at 8 o'clock. We'd love to discuss potential investment opportunities. Investment opportunities. After 20 years of silence, my son wanted my money. He just didn't know it was mine. For the first time in 2 decades, I smiled. You won't believe what happened next. But that wasn't the worst part. Let me take you back to where this all started. June 15th, 2005. Nathan's high school graduation at Boston Latin Academy. I had been working a double shift pouring concrete for the new Prudential Tower extension, but nothing was going to keep me from watching my boy walk across that stage. I remember checking my Timex, the same $30 watch I still wear today, and realizing I had exactly 17 minutes to get from the construction site in Back Bay to the school in the North End. No time to shower, no time to change, so I showed up exactly as I was. Red Wing work boots, still crusted with concrete dust. Carhartt jacket with Sullivan Construction embroidered on the back. Yellow hard hat tucked under my arm because I'd forgotten to leave it in the truck. Tool belt hanging from my waist, hammer still attached. I was so proud. 18 years old, my Nathan. First person in our family to graduate high school. I'd worked 60-hour weeks since he was born to keep him in that fancy private school, eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch so he could have hot meals in their cafeteria. The ceremony was held in this beautiful old auditorium with mahogany panels and stained glass windows. All the other parents wore suits and cocktail dresses. The mothers clutched Hermès handbags worth more than I made in 3 months. The fathers adjusted their silk ties and checked their Rolex watches. I found a seat in the back row trying to make myself invisible. But when they called Nathan Sullivan, I couldn't help myself. I stood up and cheered, "That's my boy." That's when Nathan saw me. From across that auditorium, our eyes met. I waved, grinning like an idiot. I'd never been prouder of anything in my entire life. Nathan's face went white. He looked around at his classmates, then back at me, then at the families sitting near him. Rich families. Important families. Families where the fathers wore Italian suits instead of work boots. After the ceremony, I pushed through the crowd to reach him. I had a gift. A citizen watch I'd saved up for months to buy. Nothing fancy, but it was engraved, "To Nathan, time to build your future. Love, Dad." I was maybe 10 feet away when I heard him talking to a group of his classmates. "Who's that guy in the construction outfit?" one of them asked, pointing at me. Nathan looked right at me, his father, standing there with dirt under my fingernails and hope in my heart. "I don't know who that is," he said. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest, but I kept walking toward him, thinking maybe I'd misheard. Maybe he was joking. "Nathan," I called out. "Son, I got you something." He turned around and the look in his eyes, I'd never seen anything like it. Pure embarrassment, like I was something disgusting he'd stepped in. "Don't you dare embarrass me," he hissed, his voice low enough that his classmates couldn't hear. Just go home." I stood there holding that watch, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. Around us, families were hugging, taking pictures, celebrating. The Hendersons were planning dinner at the Four Seasons. The Weatherbys were discussing their son's acceptance to Yale. And my son was pretending I didn't exist. I left without saying another word. Drove my old Ford pickup home to our 2-bedroom apartment in Southie. Put that watch in a drawer. And never mentioned graduation again. Nathan didn't come home that night. Or the next night. Or the night after that. 3 days later, he showed up with his girlfriend, Caroline, this beautiful blonde girl from Beacon Hill whose family had more money than God. She was polite enough, shaking my hand with her perfectly manicured fingers, but I could see the way she looked around our little apartment. The way her nose wrinkled slightly at the smell of joint compound that had soaked into everything I owned. "Dad," Nathan said, and for a moment I thought maybe we could fix this. "Caroline and I are going to stay at her family's place for the summer. I'll be starting Harvard in the fall." Harvard. My son was going to Harvard, and I'd never heard about it until that moment. "That's wonderful," I said. "How are we going to pay for—" "It's handled," he cut me off. "The Whitmores are helping out." The Whitmores, Caroline's family. Of course they were helping out, because God forbid the construction worker's son actually be a construction worker's son. That was the last real conversation we ever had. Nathan moved in with Caroline's family that summer, and I became an occasional inconvenience, a weekend phone call that got shorter every time, a Christmas visit that felt like a burden. The last time I saw him before everything changed was August 2007. He'd just finished his first year at Harvard Law School. Apparently he'd switched from pre-med, but nobody had bothered to tell me that either. He came by the apartment to pick up some old textbooks. Caroline waited in the car, a brand new BMW 3 Series that her daddy had bought her for graduation. "Law school's expensive," I said, trying to make conversation. "If you need help with tuition—" "I don't need help," he said without looking at me. "Caroline's father has connections. I'm getting scholarship money." Scholarship money, right. As he was leaving, I tried one more time. "Nathan, I know I'm not what you wanted in a father. I know I'm not educated or sophisticated or wealthy like Caroline's family. But I love you. That has to count for something." He stopped at the door, his hand on the knob. For a second I thought he might turn around, might say something kind. Instead he said, "Love doesn't pay for law school, Dad." Then he walked out, and I didn't see him again for 15 years. But that still wasn't the worst part. Nathan made one crucial mistake. On March 15th, 2008, Nathan legally changed his name. I found out when a process server knocked on my door with court documents. "George Sullivan, you're being notified that Nathan Michael Sullivan has petitioned the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to change his legal name to Nathan Michael Whitmore." I stared at those papers for 3 hours. My son hadn't just abandoned me, he'd erased me. Completely. The court filing was thorough. Nathan had listed his reason as desire to honor maternal family lineage. Maternal family lineage. His mother, my wife Sarah, had been dead since he was 12. She'd been a Sullivan longer than she'd been anything else. But that wasn't the real kicker. 2 weeks later, Caroline's mother called me. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Victoria Whitmore. I'm calling about the wedding preparations." Wedding. Nathan was getting married, and nobody had told me. "I wanted to reach out personally," she continued, "because Caroline mentioned that Nathan's father passed away recently. I just wanted you to know that if there's anything the family can do to help with arrangements, or if you need recommendations for grief counseling services—" I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "Well, Caroline told us that Nathan's father died in a construction accident last year. Such a tragedy. Nathan's been so brave about it." A construction accident. Nathan had killed me off, literally. Mrs. Whitmore kept talking. "We're planning a small ceremony at our estate in Beacon Hill. Nothing too elaborate, just immediate family and close friends. Nathan mentioned he didn't have any living relatives on his side, so we're treating him like one of our own boys now." No living relatives. I hung up the phone and went to my computer. Within an hour, I'd found Nathan's Harvard Law School application online. Public records, thanks to a Freedom of Information request someone had filed. Under family information, there it was. Father, deceased. Construction accident 2007. Mother, deceased. Cancer 2000. He'd even lied about when his mother died. Sarah had passed in 2002, but apparently 2000 sounded cleaner. I printed out everything. The name change petition, the law school application, the wedding announcement from the Boston Globe Society page that described Nathan as an orphan who overcame tremendous hardship to earn his law degree at Harvard. An orphan, while his father sat 10 miles away in a Southie apartment, reading about his own death in the newspaper. The wedding was held on June 21st, 2008. I know because I drove by the Whitmore estate that day. Couldn't help myself. I parked across the street and watched through the wrought iron gates as my son married Caroline in their rose garden. Nathan looked handsome in his tuxedo. Caroline was radiant in what must have been a $20,000 dress. The Whitmore's friends filled white chairs on perfectly manicured lawn, sipping champagne and eating catered hors d'oeuvres. I watched Nathan's new father-in-law walk Caroline down the aisle, watched him shake Nathan's hand afterward like he was welcoming him into the family, watched Nathan laugh at jokes and pose for photos and play the part of the grateful orphan who'd found his place among Boston's elite. Nobody mentioned the dead construction worker who'd raised him for 18 years. Why would they? At the reception, Caroline's father gave a toast. I couldn't hear the words from across the street, But I could see him raising his glass, see Nathan nodding appreciatively, see the whole assembled crowd celebrating this beautiful love story between a poor boy made good and a wealthy girl with a generous heart. That night, I went home and did something I'd never done before in my life. I got drunk. Not just tipsy, properly, thoroughly drunk on a bottle of Jameson I'd been saving for a special occasion. While I was drinking, I did some math. 18 years of raising Nathan. 18 years of 60-hour work weeks. 18 years of community college tuition that I'd paid for before he transferred to that fancy prep school. 18 years of Christmas presents and birthday gifts and school clothes and doctor visits. I added it all up. Roughly $486,000. That's what it had cost me to raise the son who'd just buried me alive. The next morning, hungover and angry, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my bank and asked for the balance on my savings account. $12,436. Everything I had in the world. Then I called a real estate agent. I want to buy distressed property, I told her. Something cheap that I can fix up and flip. She laughed. Mr. Sullivan, with your budget, you're looking at maybe a condemned house in Dorchester. Something that needs total renovation. Perfect, I said. Show me everything you've got. Nathan wanted to pretend his father was dead? Fine. George Sullivan, the construction worker, was dead, but someone else was about to be born. I spent the next week looking at properties. Finally found a 3-family house on Savin Hill that was about to be seized by the city for unpaid taxes. The owner owed $46,000 in back taxes and penalties. The house was worth maybe $200,000 if you could fix the foundation, update the electrical, and replace the roof. I offered the owner $15,000 cash for a quick sale. He took it. Spent the next 18 months living in that house while I renovated it myself, working my construction job during the day, then coming home and working on the house until midnight. Learned plumbing from YouTube videos. Taught myself electrical work from library books. Fixed that foundation 1 bucket of concrete at a time. Sold it in October 2009 for $218,000. After expenses, I cleared about $150,000. Then I bought 2 more houses. By 2012, I owned 12 properties across Boston. By 2015, I'd incorporated as Emerald Holdings LLC and was developing entire city blocks. Nathan thought he'd buried his father. Instead, he'd given birth to something much more dangerous. 20 years later, the invitation arrived. December 10th, 2023. That's when everything came full circle. I was in my office on the 47th floor of 200 Clarendon Street, the same building Nathan's law firm rents space in, though he's never known that, when my assistant brought in the mail. Most of it was the usual stuff. Property tax bills, development permits, investor correspondence. But there at the bottom of the pile was an envelope that made me stop cold. Cream-colored cardstock. Thick, expensive paper. The kind that screams old money. And there, embossed in gold foil, was the Whitmore family crest. I opened it with the same letter opener I'd been using for 15 years, a cheap plastic thing I'd gotten free from a bank promotion. Some habits die hard. Mr. George Sullivan, Emerald Holdings LLC, the invitation read. The Whitmore family cordially invites you to join us for Christmas Eve dinner at 8 o'clock. We understand you're one of Boston's most successful development entrepreneurs, and we'd love to discuss potential investment opportunities with our son-in-law's struggling legal practice. Son-in-law's struggling legal practice. Nathan needed money. I read it 3 times before the full irony hit me. My son, the same son who'd told everyone I was dead, was inviting me to dinner to ask for money. He just didn't know the stranger he was inviting was his father. I sat back in my leather chair, a $6,000 Herman Miller piece that Nathan probably couldn't afford, and laughed. Actually, laughed out loud for the first time in years. The return address was 847 Beacon Street. I knew that address. I'd driven by it 1,000 times over the years, usually late at night when I couldn't sleep. It's where Nathan lived with Caroline and their daughter Emma, my granddaughter who doesn't know I exist. I pulled up the property records on my computer. The Whitmore estate, built in 1887, 8,400 square feet, last sold in 1952 for $42,000. Current estimated value, $4.6 million. Old money. The kind of wealth that gets passed down through generations without anyone having to work for it. I'd been tracking Nathan's career from a distance for years. Court records are public information, and Nathan's law firm specialized in corporate litigation, high-profile stuff, the kind of cases that should have made him rich. But apparently they hadn't. According to the Massachusetts Bar Association database, Whitmore and Associates had been struggling for the past 18 months. 2 major clients had dropped them after Nathan lost a case that should have been a slam dunk. Word was getting around that Nathan Whitmore wasn't as sharp as his Harvard degree suggested. Funny how success requires more than just a prestigious education. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a file I'd been keeping for 20 years. Every newspaper clipping about Nathan's career, every court case he'd won or lost, every society page mention of him and Caroline at some charity function or art gallery opening. Nathan Michael Whitmore, Harvard Law School graduate, member of the Boston Bar Association, husband to Caroline Whitmore, daughter of the prominent Whitmore family, father to Emma Whitmore, age 6, no mention anywhere of George Sullivan. The construction worker who'd raised him was officially dead, buried under a pile of lies and legal documents. I closed the file and made a decision. I was going to accept that invitation. But first, I had some preparation to do. If Nathan wanted to meet George Sullivan of Emerald Holdings, he was going to get the full experience. I spent the next week having my lawyers compile a portfolio. Every property I owned, every development project I'd completed, every dollar I'd earned since the day Nathan had declared me dead. The numbers were staggering, even to me. Starting with that first house in 2008, I'd built an empire. Emerald Holdings now owned 312 properties across Massachusetts. We'd developed 17 commercial projects, including the office building where Nathan's law firm was headquartered. Total net worth, $183,426,000. Not bad for a dead construction worker. I also had my investigators do a deep dive into Nathan's finances. What they found was even more interesting than I'd expected. Nathan's law firm was worse than struggling. It was 6 weeks away from bankruptcy. They owed $430,000 in unpaid rent, legal fees, and employee salaries. 2 of their biggest clients had already started working with other firms. Caroline had been dipping into her trust fund to keep the lights on. The Whitmores were old money, but they weren't stupid money. Caroline's father had cut off Nathan's access to the family accounts after the second major case loss. From now on, Nathan would have to succeed on his own merit. Apparently his own merit wasn't worth much. But here's what really caught my attention. Nathan had been researching local investors for months, trying to find someone willing to throw money at a failing law firm. His search had led him to a list of Boston's wealthiest entrepreneurs. At the top of that list, George Sullivan, Emerald Holdings, LLC. My son was so desperate for money that he was willing to invite a stranger to Christmas dinner on the off chance they might write him a check. Christmas Eve would change everything. But here's what Nathan never knew. I'd been paying for his life the entire time he thought I was dead. Let me tell you about the anonymous donations. It started in September 2009, Nathan's second year at Harvard Law School. I'd just sold that first house and had some real money for the first time in my life. I was sitting in my new office, just a rented space above a diner in Dorchester, but it was mine, when I got curious about how Nathan was really paying for his education. A few phone calls to the Harvard Financial Aid Office pretending to be conducting an alumni survey gave me everything I needed to know. Nathan had received a partial academic scholarship worth $18,000 a year. Not bad, but Harvard Law School cost $82,000 annually back then. The Whitmores were covering the difference through something called the Beacon Hill Charitable Foundation. Rich families love their tax-deductible giving, and apparently Nathan's education counted as charity. That night, I set up my own foundation, the New England Education Fund. Completely legitimate, incorporated in Delaware, designed to provide anonymous educational assistance to deserving students from working-class backgrounds. The next morning, I called Harvard's development office. I'd like to make an anonymous donation, I told them, $80,000 to cover the remaining tuition for a specific student, Nathan Whitmore. That's very generous, the administrator said. May I ask what prompted this gift? I thought about that graduation ceremony, about Nathan pretending not to know me, about all those peanut butter sandwiches I'd eaten so he could have hot meals. Let's just say I knew his father, I said. The check cleared on October 15th, 2009.
Nathan's second-year tuition was paid in full. According to the records I obtained later, Nathan assumed it was another Whitmore family donation. He never questioned where the money came from. Over the next 3 years, I paid for everything: tuition, books, housing, even Nathan's spring break trip to Europe junior year. Total investment, $323,400, but that was just the beginning. In 2012, Nathan graduated and took a job with a mid-sized firm downtown. Starting salary was decent, $90,000 a year, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle he'd grown accustomed to. Caroline had her trust fund, but even that had limits. So when Nathan announced he wanted to start his own practice, the Whitmores balked. Too risky, they said. Too much uncertainty. That's when the Boston Small Business Development Grant appeared.
A completely fictional program I'd created through a network of shell companies. Nathan's application for startup funding was approved within a week. Grant amount, $280,000. Nathan used the money to lease office space, hire staff, and cover operating expenses for his first 2 years. He thought he was getting government assistance for disadvantaged entrepreneurs. In reality, his dead father was bankrolling his dream. The pattern continued for years. Every time Nathan needed money, a mysterious benefactor appeared. When Caroline wanted to start her art foundation in 2015, the New England Arts Endowment provided a $450,000 operating grant. When Emma needed speech therapy after a childhood accident, the Children's Healthcare Trust covered all medical expenses, $68,000 over 2 years. When Nathan and Caroline bought their house in Cambridge in 2018, a gorgeous Victorian that cost $1.2 million. They got an incredibly favorable mortgage through a bank I secretly owned 20% of. Their loan application was approved despite Nathan's inconsistent income, thanks to a special community leader program that existed only in their file. Most recently, when Emma started at the exclusive Brookline Academy last year, $35,000 annual tuition, the Academic Excellence Scholarship Fund covered the full cost. Nathan never questioned any of it. Rich people expect good things to happen to them. They assume they deserve assistance, deserve favorable treatment, deserve success. Caroline had no idea where the money really came from, but she was raised to believe that wealthy families take care of their own. When opportunities appeared, she accepted them gracefully. My granddaughter, Emma, was the only pure thing in any of this. A beautiful little girl with Sarah's eyes and my stubborn chin. I'd been watching her from a distance for 6 years, attending her school plays from the back row, following her soccer games from the parking lot. She didn't know her grandfather was alive, but I knew everything about her. Her favorite color was purple. She wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. She'd inherited my wife's talent for drawing and Nathan's quick mind for mathematics. Every anonymous donation I'd made was really for her, to ensure she had the best education, the best opportunities, the best life possible. Even if her father was too proud and stubborn to let me be part of it. But the donations weren't just about love. They were about strategy. See, every check I'd written over the years came with detailed records, bank statements, wire transfer receipts, grant approval letters. I'd kept copies of everything, organized in a filing system that would make the IRS proud. Nathan thought he'd built his success through merit, hard work, and family connections. He had no idea that his entire adult life had been subsidized by the father he'd buried. The total came to $1,237,416.32 over 15 years. I knew the exact amount because I'd been keeping a running total in a ledger, the same way my own father had tracked every penny when I was growing up. More than $1 million, given freely, without conditions, without recognition, without thanks. All while Nathan told everyone I was dead. The beautiful thing about anonymous donations is that they create a paper trail. Every transaction was legitimate, properly documented, completely legal. The recipient never knows who's helping them, but the donor keeps proof of every penny. By December 2023, I had enough documentation to prove that Nathan's entire adult life, his law degree, his business, his wife's foundation, his daughter's education, even his house, had been built on the generosity of a dead man. A dead man who was about to come back to life. Caroline had no idea where the money really came from, but she was about to find out. October 23rd, 2022, the Boston Real Estate Development Conference at the Seaport Hotel. I'd been invited as the keynote speaker to talk about building wealth from ground zero, a blue-collar success story. The irony wasn't lost on me, a dead construction worker giving advice to living entrepreneurs. The audience was packed with developers, investors, and lawyers. 500 of Boston's most ambitious professionals, all looking to learn from the mysterious George Sullivan, who'd built a real estate empire in just 15 years. I was 3 minutes into my presentation when I saw him. Nathan was sitting in the back row, partially hidden behind a column. He'd grown a beard since the last photos I'd seen, and he'd gained maybe 15 pounds, but there was no mistaking him. Same dark hair as his mother. Same way of holding his left shoulder slightly higher than his right when he was nervous. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not embarrassment, not anger, but something else. Recognition mixed with confusion. I continued my speech without missing a beat, but I kept watching him from the corner of my eye. Success, I told the audience, isn't about where you start. It's about how willing you are to sacrifice for the people you love. Nathan shifted in his seat. I built this company with my hands, I continued, holding up my palm so everyone could see the old calluses that never quite disappeared. Started with one condemned house and a $12,000 savings account. Worked 18-hour days for 5 years straight. A woman in the front row raised her hand. Mr. Sullivan, what motivated you to keep going when things got difficult? I looked directly at Nathan when I answered. My son. Everything I built for him, even though he doesn't know it yet. Nathan's face went white. He stood up abruptly and walked toward the exit, but not before our eyes met for just a moment across that crowded ballroom. For 5 seconds we stared at each other, father and son, the dead man and the son who'd buried him. Then Nathan pushed through the exit doors and disappeared. After my presentation, I found the conference coordinator and asked for the attendee list. Nathan had registered under his law firm's name. Nathan Whitmore, Senior Partner, Whitmore & Associates. Not Nathan Sullivan, Nathan Whitmore. Even at a professional conference where nobody knew his history, he couldn't bear to use his real name. I drove past his law office that evening. It was in a converted brownstone on Newbury Street, expensive real estate in a prestigious neighborhood, the kind of address that screams success to potential clients. Through the windows, I could see Nathan at his desk, talking animatedly on the phone. He kept running his hands through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood, the same gesture he used to make when he was trying to solve a difficult math problem or when he was worried about disappointing someone. I wondered if he was calling Caroline, wondering if he was telling her about the strange coincidence of seeing someone who looked exactly like his supposedly dead father giving a speech about building something from nothing. Or maybe he was calling the Whitmores, asking if they'd ever known anyone named George Sullivan, trying to figure out if this was some bizarre coincidence or something more complicated. The next morning, I had my assistant call Nathan's office with a fictional legal matter, something about property development permits that would require an experienced corporate attorney. I'm sorry, his receptionist said, but Mr. Whitmore isn't taking new clients right now. The firm is restructuring. Restructuring. That's corporate speak for we're broke and hoping nobody notices. I hung up and smiled. Nathan's reaction told me everything I needed to know. He'd recognized me at that conference, but he was too proud or too scared to confront the possibility that his dead father might actually be alive and successful. That's when Nathan made his fatal mistake. Instead of investigating further, instead of facing the truth, he chose to pretend it hadn't happened, just like he'd pretended not to know me at graduation, just like he'd pretended I was dead when it was convenient. But this time, his pretending was going to cost him everything. By November 2023, Nathan's law firm was in serious trouble. I know because I made it my business to know. When you own as much real estate as I do in Boston, you hear things. Lawyers gossip worse than high school students, and Nathan's struggles were becoming common knowledge in legal circles. The problem started with the Henderson case. Nathan was representing a tech startup in a patent dispute. Should have been an easy win worth $2 million in fees. Instead, Nathan missed a crucial filing deadline and lost the case on a technicality. The startup sued Nathan for malpractice and won a $400,000 judgment. Then came the Morrison divorce. High-profile couple, lots of assets to divide, billable hours that should have carried the firm for 6 months. Nathan's strategy backfired spectacularly when he accused the wife of hiding assets that turned out to be completely legitimate. The judge sanctioned Nathan personally for frivolous litigation, and the case became a cautionary tale in family law circles. By December, Nathan had lost 3 major clients and gained a reputation for sloppy work. The firm's malpractice insurance premiums tripled. 2 associates quit for better opportunities. The office rent was 3 months behind. Caroline's father, William Whitmore III, called an emergency family meeting on December 5th. I know because Caroline's assistant, who happened to work for a temp agency I owned a minority stake in, was asked to clear Caroline's schedule. The meeting didn't go well for Nathan. According to my sources, and when you're worth $180 million, you develop excellent sources, William delivered an ultimatum. Nathan had 30 days to turn the firm around, or the Whitmore family would cut off all financial support. Caroline's trust fund isn't a charity for failed lawyers, William reportedly said. Figure out how to succeed on your own merit or find a different profession. The next day, Nathan started researching Boston's wealthiest investors. He was looking for what he called silent partners, rich individuals who might be willing to invest in his firm in exchange for a percentage of future profits. His list included tech entrepreneurs, old money families, real estate moguls, and venture capital funds. 47 potential targets, ranked by net worth and likelihood of investment. George Sullivan, Emerald Holdings LLC, was number 3 on the list. Nathan spent 2 weeks crafting his approach strategy. He researched my background, my investment history, my known business interests. What he found was impressive enough to make him nervous. I was worth significantly more than he'd initially thought. But here's what Nathan didn't find: any connection between George Sullivan and his supposedly dead father. Why would he? George Sullivan, the construction worker, had died in 2007, according to Nathan's official story. George Sullivan, the real estate mogul, hadn't appeared until 2008. The timing was perfect. Nathan needed money desperately, and he'd identified a potential investor who had both the wealth and the local business connections to save his failing firm. On December 8th, Caroline suggested hosting a dinner party. If you're going to ask someone for money, she told Nathan, at least do it properly. Invite him to the house. Let him see that he'd be investing in a family with connections and class. Nathan loved the idea. The Whitmore estate was impressive enough to make any investor take notice. The family name carried weight in Boston. And Caroline was charming enough to smooth over any rough edges in Nathan's presentation. They decided on Christmas Eve. Intimate, elegant, with just enough family present to demonstrate stability without overwhelming their guest. Caroline handled the invitation. She'd met enough investors through her art foundation work to know how to strike the right tone. Respectful, but not desperate. Interested, but not pushy. We'd love to discuss potential investment opportunities, she wrote in the invitation. Casual enough to seem social, specific enough to indicate serious business intent. The return address was embossed with the Whitmore family crest, old money legitimacy that would impress any self-made entrepreneur. Nathan never questioned Caroline's choice of wording. He was too focused on preparing his pitch presentation, financial projections, client acquisition strategies, market analysis for Boston's legal services industry. He spent hours practicing his presentation in their home office, the same room where he'd once done homework with tutors I'd secretly paid for. Caroline listened patiently as he explained why Whitmore and Associates represented a perfect investment opportunity for a discerning business partner. The firm has experienced temporary setbacks, Nathan would say, but our core competencies remain strong. With proper capitalization, we could capture significant market share in corporate litigation. Corporates speak for, "Please give me money before I lose everything." The invitation went out on December 10th. I received it the same day. Nathan had no idea he was inviting his own father to Christmas dinner. In his mind, he was simply reaching out to a successful businessman who might be willing to invest in his struggling law firm. The irony was beautiful. For 20 years, Nathan had taken anonymous money from his supposedly dead father without question. Now he was formally asking that same father for help, still without knowing who was really behind the generosity. Christmas Eve would change everything. The 2 weeks between receiving the invitation and Christmas Eve were the most important of my life. If I was going to do this, if I was really going to reveal myself to Nathan after 20 years of being dead, I needed to do it right. No emotion, no anger, no pleading, just cold, hard evidence that would speak louder than any words I could say. I spent the first week organizing 20 years of documentation into a comprehensive portfolio. Every anonymous donation, every shell company, every financial transaction that had touched Nathan's life since 2008. The Harvard Law School receipts came first. 4 years of tuition payments, each one marked anonymous donor through the New England Education Fund. $83,200 per year. Total, $332,800. Next came the law firm's startup funding. The fake Boston Small Business Development Grant that had provided Nathan with $280,000 in seed money. The grant application was particularly interesting. Nathan had listed his background as orphaned student who overcame significant socioeconomic disadvantages through academic achievement. Orphaned student. My son had built his entire professional identity on being fatherless. Then there were Caroline's Art Foundation grants. The New England Arts Endowment had provided $450,000 over 8 years for operating expenses, gallery exhibitions, and educational programming. Caroline had written beautiful thank you letters to the anonymous benefactor, describing how the funding had allowed her to provide cultural enrichment to underserved communities. Emma's education expenses were next. The Brookline Academy Scholarship Fund $350,000 over 6 years for tuition, books, and enrichment programs. Speech therapy bills, $68,000 paid directly to Massachusetts General Hospital. Summer camp fees, music lessons, art supplies, even the purple bicycle she'd gotten for her 6th birthday. I'd been tracking every penny of my granddaughter's life from a distance, making sure she had everything she needed while her father told the world that her grandfather was dead. The house in Cambridge was perhaps the most damning evidence of all. Nathan and Caroline had purchased the Victorian brownstone for $1.2 million in 2018. Their down payment came from Caroline's trust fund, but their mortgage approval had been unusual. Nathan's income as a solo practitioner was inconsistent. Some months he made $15,000, other months less than $3,000. Most banks would have rejected his application immediately. But Harbor Trust Bank, where I owned a 22% stake, had approved their loan under a community leader initiative that existed nowhere except in their specific file. The mortgage terms were remarkably favorable, 3.2% interest when market rates were closer to 5%. No private mortgage insurance required despite their minimal down payment, a payment schedule that adjusted automatically during Nathan's lean months. Harbor Trust's loan officer had noted in the file, applicant demonstrates strong community ties and significant potential for career growth. Recommend approval under special circumstances provision. Special circumstances. That was my money talking. I had my lawyers prepare a comprehensive summary document, a timeline that showed every financial benefit Nathan had received since declaring me dead, cross-referenced with the source of each payment. The pattern was undeniable. Every time Nathan needed money, a mysterious benefactor appeared within weeks. Law school tuition, anonymous education fund, business startup costs, anonymous business grant, wife's art foundation, anonymous arts endowment, daughter's education, anonymous scholarship program, house purchase, anonymous favorable mortgage terms, more than $1.2 million in benefits over 15 years, all while Nathan told everyone that his father was dead and buried. I also compiled a separate file of Nathan's public statements about his background, Harvard Law School application essays describing his tragic orphan status, law firm marketing materials mentioning his self-made success despite early family losses, social media posts from Caroline talking about Nathan's incredible resilience in overcoming childhood trauma. Even their Christmas cards mentioned Nathan's inspirational story, the brilliant young man who'd succeeded despite losing both parents by age 18. The most painful evidence was the interviews Nathan had given over the years. Boston Magazine had profiled him as one of the city's rising legal stars in 2015. The article opened with Nathan discussing how his parents' deaths had motivated him to succeed. "I learned early that you can't depend on anyone but yourself," Nathan had told the reporter. "When you lose your family young, you develop a different relationship with risk and security. Every success feels more meaningful because you know how quickly everything can disappear. Every success feels more meaningful. My son was literally profiting from my supposed death, using his orphan story as a marketing tool to attract clients who admired his resilience. By December 20th, I had everything organized into a leather portfolio, the same kind Nathan carried to court hearings. 214 pages of evidence, chronologically arranged, each section marked with tabs and summary sheets. The final page was a handwritten letter I'd started dozens of times over the years, but never finished. It was simple, direct, and devastating. Nathan, I've been alive this entire time, paying for your life while you told everyone I was dead. Merry Christmas. Love, your very much not dead father, George Sullivan. Christmas Eve would change everything. December 24th, 2023, 8:47 p.m. I stood outside the Whitmore estate on Beacon Street, holding the leather portfolio that would change my son's life forever. The house was even more impressive in person, 3 stories of Georgian architecture, with ivy-covered walls and windows glowing with warm light. Through the front windows, I could see the family gathered around a magnificent dining room table. Caroline's parents, her brother and sister-in-law, and Nathan himself, all dressed in the kind of casual elegance that only old money can pull off. And there, at the end of the table, in a purple dress that matched her favorite color, was Emma, my granddaughter, 6 years old and beautiful, just like her grandmother Sarah had been. I rang the doorbell at exactly 8 o'clock. Caroline answered the door herself, smiling warmly. She was even more beautiful than her photos. Blonde hair swept into an elegant updo, wearing a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my first car. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Caroline Whitmore. Welcome to our home." She led me through a foyer that screamed old money marble floors, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, a crystal chandelier that cast rainbow patterns on the walls. Everything Nathan had wanted when he'd rejected his working-class father. The dining room was a masterpiece of understated wealth. A 12-foot mahogany table set with china that belonged in a museum, crystal glasses catching candlelight from silver candelabras, fresh flowers arranged in vases that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Nathan stood to greet me, extending his hand with the practiced charm of a successful lawyer. He was wearing a navy suit that fit him perfectly, probably tailored, definitely expensive. His wedding ring caught the light as he reached out. "Mr. Sullivan, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Nathan Whitmore." Nathan Whitmore, not Nathan Sullivan. Even in his own home, even with his wife and daughter present, he couldn't bear to use his real name. I shook his hand and looked directly into his eyes. "The pleasure's mine, Nathan." For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Recognition, confusion, but then it was gone, replaced by professional courtesy. Caroline made the introductions. Her parents, William and Victoria Whitmore, were exactly what I'd expected. Polite, reserved, radiating the quiet confidence of people who'd never had to worry about money. Her brother James was a carbon copy of his father, down to the Ivy League tie pin. And then there was Emma. "This is our daughter Emma," Caroline said proudly. "Emma, can you say hello to Mr. Sullivan?" My granddaughter looked up at me with dark eyes that were exactly like her grandmother's. "Hello, Mr. Sullivan. Mommy says you might help Daddy's business." The words hit me like a physical blow. This beautiful little girl had no idea she was looking at her grandfather. As far as she knew, both of her father's parents were dead. "Hello, Emma," I managed. "That's a beautiful dress." She beamed. "It's purple. Purple's my favorite color." "Mine too," I said, and meant it. Dinner was an elaborate affair, 7 courses, each one perfectly prepared and presented. The conversation flowed around neutral topics: the weather, local politics, the upcoming mayoral election. Nathan was charming and articulate, working hard to impress his potential investor. We were halfway through the main course when Nathan finally brought up business. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, setting down his wine glass, "I hope you don't mind me mentioning why we invited you tonight." "Not at all," I said. "I'm always interested in new opportunities." Nathan launched into his prepared presentation. Whitmore & Associates was a boutique firm specializing in high-stakes corporate litigation. They'd built an impressive client base and established strong relationships throughout Boston's business community. Recent market fluctuations had created temporary cash flow challenges, but the fundamentals remained strong. He was good, confident, persuasive, painting a picture of a law firm that was poised for explosive growth with proper investment. If I hadn't known the truth about his recent malpractice suits and client defections, I might have been impressed. "What kind of investment are you looking for?" I asked. "$500,000 would allow us to expand our staff and take on larger cases," Nathan said. "In return, we'd offer 25% equity in the firm." $500,000. Nathan wanted me to give him $500,000 to save the business I'd been secretly funding for 15 years. I nodded thoughtfully. "That's a significant investment. What kind of due diligence materials can you provide?" Nathan's face lit up. "I have comprehensive financial statements, client testimonials, market analysis projections." "Actually," I said, reaching for the leather portfolio I'd placed beside my chair, "before we discuss your materials, I'd like to show you some of mine." I opened the portfolio and removed the first document, Nathan's Harvard Law School bursar statement from 2009. I placed it on the table next to his wine glass. "This is interesting reading," I said quietly. $83,200 in tuition, paid by an anonymous donor through something called the New England Education Fund. Nathan stared at the document, his face going pale. Where did you get this?" I placed the next document on the table. "The Boston Small Business Development Grant application from 2012. $280,000 in startup funding for Whitmore and Associates. Also anonymous. Fascinating coincidence." Caroline leaned forward, her expression confused. "Nathan, what is this?" I kept placing documents on the table one by one. The Art Foundation grants, the mortgage approval documents, the private school scholarships. 20 years of anonymous generosity, all laid out in chronological order. The room had gone completely silent. William Whitmore was staring at the papers with the sharp attention of someone who'd spent his life managing family money. Victoria had stopped eating entirely. Emma was still focused on her dessert, oblivious to the tension building around her. $1,237,416, I said, placing the summary sheet on top of the pile. "That's how much money you've received from anonymous benefactors since you legally changed your name in 2008. Nathan's hand was shaking as he reached for his wine glass. "I don't understand what this has to do with our business discussion," I smiled, the same quiet smile I'd given when I first received their invitation. "It has everything to do with our business discussion, Nathan. You see, every single one of these donations came from the same source. The New England Education Fund, the Boston Small Business Development Grant, the Arts Endowment, the Academic Excellence Scholarship Fund. They're all shell companies, all funded by the same person." I reached into the portfolio one last time and removed the handwritten letter I'd prepared. I placed it directly in front of Nathan's plate. "Me." The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Nathan stared at the letter, then up at me, then back at the letter. "That's impossible," he whispered. "My father is dead. He died in a construction accident." "No," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Your father legally died when his son filed papers declaring him deceased, but George Sullivan, the construction worker, became George Sullivan, the real estate developer. Same man, different life." Caroline gasped. "Nathan, what is he talking about?" I stood up slowly, keeping my eyes on Nathan's face. "Hello, son. I've been alive this entire time, paying for your life while you told everyone I was dead." Nathan's chair scraped backward as he shot to his feet. "This is insane. You can't be." "I'm exactly who I've always been," I said. "I'm the construction worker who raised you for 18 years. I'm the man you were ashamed of at graduation. I'm the father you legally buried so you could marry into a respectable family." Emma looked up from her ice cream, finally sensing the tension in the room. "Daddy, why is everyone shouting?" Nathan's face had gone from pale to red. "You need to leave right now. This is harassment." "Is it harassment when a dead man keeps receipts?" I asked, gesturing to the documents scattered across their expensive table. "Every dollar you've spent on Harvard, every dollar Caroline's spent on her art foundation, every dollar little Emma's private school has received, it all came from me, your supposedly dead father." William Whitmore cleared his throat. "Nathan, I think you need to explain what's happening here." Nathan looked around the table, at Caroline's shocked face, at her parents' disapproving expressions, at Emma's confused eyes, everyone waiting for an explanation he couldn't give.
He's lying, Nathan said finally. My father died in 2007. This man is he's some kind of con artist. I reached into my jacket and pulled out one final document. Nathan's original birth certificate, the one that listed his name as Nathan Michael Sullivan. Nathan Michael Sullivan, I read aloud. Born June 3rd, 1989. Father, George Patrick Sullivan. Mother, Sarah Catherine Sullivan. I looked up at him. I kept your original birth certificate all these years, just in case you ever forgot who you really are. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Emma had stopped eating, sensing that something monumentally important was happening at her grandparents' perfect dining room table.
Finally, Caroline spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan, is this true? Nathan never answered Caroline's question that night. Instead, he grabbed his coat and left. Just walked out of his own Christmas Eve dinner, leaving his wife and daughter to sit in stunned silence with the grandfather Emma had never known existed. I stayed for another hour. Caroline asked 1,000 questions, and I answered every one honestly. William Whitmore examined my documents with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant and confirmed that everything was legitimate. Your father, he told Caroline quietly, has been incredibly generous to your family. Emma warmed up to me quickly once Caroline explained that I was her daddy's daddy. She showed me her drawings and told me about school and asked if I wanted to see her room. Children adapt to truth faster than adults. By the time I left that night, Caroline had made a decision that would change everything. She filed for legal separation on January 3rd, not because she was angry about Nathan's lies, but because she could no longer trust someone who would erase his own father's existence for social convenience. Nathan's law firm declared bankruptcy on January 15th. Without the anonymous funding that had sustained it for over a decade, and with his reputation destroyed by whispers of family scandal, there was no path forward. I didn't feel satisfaction watching Nathan's world collapse. I felt something deeper. Peace. For 20 years, I'd been enabling his delusion that he could succeed while pretending his father was dead. Now the truth was setting us both free. Nathan called me exactly once, 3 weeks after Christmas. He asked for money to keep the firm running. I said no. You spent 20 years taking money from a dead man, I told him. Living men have conditions. He hung up without asking what those conditions were. Caroline and Emma moved into a smaller house in Brookline that I bought for them, not as a gift, as a loan. Caroline insisted on paying fair market rent, and I respected that. Emma visits my office every Saturday morning now. We have breakfast together, and she tells me about school. Sometimes she brings her homework, and I help her with math problems. She calls me Grandpa George, and it's the best sound in the world. Nathan can see her whenever he wants, but only if he's willing to acknowledge who I am. So far, he's chosen pride over his daughter. Last month, Emma asked me why her daddy won't visit anymore. Some people, I told her, need time to remember what's really important. Emma calls me Grandpa George now. Nathan can call me Mr. Sullivan.